Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by Calum Ferguson from the Alba FA. Calum, how are you doing? Thanks very much for coming on the show.
I'm very well, thank you, Rory, and thank you for obviously inviting us onto the show, and looking forward to talking all things Gaelic related and football related this afternoon.
Yeah, me too, mate. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. And today's discussion is really going to be focused around this football association called the Alba FA to represent the Gaelic community and diaspora in Scotland and overseas, which I think is absolutely incredible. And obviously ticks a lot of boxes for what we aim to talk about in terms of heritage and representation. You know, we've had discussions like this on the show before with Stevie Leshik from the Soccer Federation of Appalachia. So I'm looking forward to what's going to be an incredible discussion, and one in which I mean, I was going to say my Gaelic skills are going to be put to the test, but I can't actually speak Gaelic, so I'm hoping they're not going to be put to the test because I'm going to get absolutely shown up. But I think this is going to be part of this discussion between the culture of football in Scotland, and what a lot of our listeners probably won't know is probably why Gaelic people in the Gaelic community need a football association to represent them. So these are all the things that we're going to be talking about. It's going to be a great chat, but just before we jump into things properly, Calum, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, first of all, and your role within the Alba FA?
Absolutely, and hopefully by the end of the chat, Rory, we'll have some new Gaelic words for you as well, and that's what this is all about. But yeah, to answer your question there, I'm the co-founder of the Alba FA and the current development manager within the community. And my own background is in professional football. I entered the professional game at 16 years old with my local team, Inverness Caledonian Thistle, and had a bit of a baptism of fire with Terry Butcher at the reins at the time. So it was a fantastic learning experience of the professional game. And I was just fortunate enough to be around a team that was very successful at the time, and it was a special time for Highland football. I left the club 6 years later after the Scottish Cup year, the Europa League year, so it was a fantastic time to be at the club. From there, I had spells playing in Canada, in New Zealand, in the States, Northern Ireland and Cornwall. And over this period of time, this concept of applying football and Gaelic was developing through these different experiences. I would say I'm quite a curious individual. I like to see things, I like to learn, I like to absorb information, and almost fell into this funny football world of searching for different environments within the game. And during this process, this concept was developing. So it's been years in the making. Should mention as well, I have a Canadian passport, which is a big part of what it's about. That's a story that we'll come to, but I was fortunate enough to play for the Canadian youth national teams from under 18 level to under 21s. So that's my own kind of background, and eventually over that process, as I said, this concept of the Alba FA developed over time.
Yeah, I mean, you've had obviously such an interesting career in terms of, you know, travelling to, I suppose, what I would look at as some of these touch points for, you know, the Scottish diaspora, but the Gaelic diaspora as well. Obviously Canada and New Zealand being the big ones, but you've also turned out for Cascadia, which from a CONIFA perspective is really significant and really interesting as well, given the types of conversations that we're going to have. And you know, we've spoken about the Cascadia IFA before and how they've come around. So, you know, it's almost like you've said that this kind of idea of having representative football associations has been a kind of underpinning theme of your football career. And I guess that's where the idea for the Alba FA ended up coming around, is that this thing that was kind of constant, obviously inspired you to go on and found it. I mean, from just looking at your career, basically travelled all over the world. I mean, it's been absolutely incredible having a Canadian passport and having access to that as well. It does seem like the inspiration has come from these types of experiences that you've had.
I think you described that better than I could, to be honest. I think you put your finger on it there, Rory. Travelling to these areas totally unintentionally, maybe, where I'll say unintentionally, the Canadian passport is definitely a big aspect of that. However, travelling to to Nova Scotia, to Winnipeg, Manitoba, to Christchurch in New Zealand, Gaelic people went all over the world, as you've mentioned there, and they settled in these different communities all over the world. And through my own playing career, I was fortunate enough to spend time in these areas and see how Gaelic stopped being spoken in these communities, the different reasons at play there, but also how football developed in these communities as well, and not just football, but other sports. For example, spending time in New Zealand, I have to mention this, the Maori culture and the direct tie to rugby was a massive source of inspiration for myself. The team that we were playing for at the time reflected their own culture of the Christchurch Crusaders at the time. So Canterbury United followed that Maori tradition in the game, where even to how we conducted ourselves in the locker room and on the field was intertwined with different Maori values. And experiencing that was a massive learning curve for myself, and it made me reflect on Scotland and Gaelic, and could we do something like this in Scotland for the Gaelic speaking community. And another one I'll touch on is playing in the Canadian Premier League with Alba FC. One of the teams that we played against was the Halifax Wanderers in Nova Scotia, who have a Gaelic motto: our Carla, our Dachi, our Enam, our harbour, our soul, our name. There's not one club in Scotland that has a Gaelic motto within their logo, or I should say professional club. There is amateur clubs, but there's no professional club. And these different experiences just had my brain spinning and evolving, and it just was a natural thing where Gaelic's something that's very important to me. Football is the world that I've known, and it was just trying to combine these two together to try and make a difference and play a wee part in trying to move the needle for Gaelic, for obviously to ensure that it can be passed on to future generations.
Yeah, I think that context is really important. I like the example of how you were inspired by the Maori culture that was present within football in New Zealand. And it always kind of comes back to this conversation that we end up having with different people. So when I worked at a World Heritage site, we would get a lot of American tourists, and we would always get hit with the question, oh, so can you speak Gaelic to us? And we would always reply no, because in the lowlands in Scotland, I'd say you'd be hard-pressed to find any communities who are entirely Gaelic-speaking. You may get some isolated pockets here and there, and obviously there are Gaelic schools, but I'd say it's never been the native language of the Scottish lowlands, and it's never really been part of our culture in the same way that it's been part of the Highlands and Islands. But people don't know that. People always assume that Scotland is one ethnically and culturally unified country, but that's not exactly the case. The cultures between the Highlands and the Lowlands are incredibly different. And people might even scoff at you if you said, well, New Zealand have the Maori culture and the Maori people influence in their football clubs, so why can't we have that for the Gaelic community within Scotland? And some people might laugh at you, particularly if they're from the Lowlands, and say, well, you know, there's so few people that speak Gaelic now, why should we bother putting resources and time into this? But that's the point of the Alba FA, and that's the point of this discussion that we're having, is that to lose the Gaelic culture, the language, the people, the community would be completely devastating for the entire diaspora and the entire Gaelic nation. That actually trying to promote it and preserve it is what we need to do, and it's been at crisis levels for so many years now. But then you also get into this interesting discussion about the diaspora, where in Nova Scotia, because they are members of the Gaelic diaspora, they almost embrace it so much better and so much more than we actually do in Scotland. So, you know, there's all these different dynamics at play, and we could go into, you know, it's because of the Highland clearances and because of migration, and this is the reason why there are Gaelic communities all over the world. And it is important context, though, because it does give a bit of a meaning for the reason for the Alba FA to actually exist.
Absolutely. I think you've touched on a lot of very important points there. And exactly, I believe also why something like the Alba FA hasn't existed until this stage. I think it's an interesting dynamic, especially when you look at Nova Scotia, if you look at America, if you look at New Zealand, that expat Scottish community, the Gaelic diaspora, as you mentioned there. One thing that I've personally experienced from travelling to these areas is that passion and that connection and that desire to reconnect to their cultural roots, which is not quite the same in Scotland. I feel as if in Scotland there's more of a disconnect between the Scottish people and the Gaelic language, the Gaelic culture, and Gaelic heritage. And elsewhere, people, because they've lost that connection, they've realised how important it is to have that connection, to have that meaning, to have that purpose and that knowledge of where you came from and why you are who you are. And within Scotland, to take it back into that context, Scotland as a nation, as you've correctly identified, has been shaped by Gaelic culture. It's a massive part of Scottish identity. It's a massive part of Scottish culture and Scottish heritage. And if that was to be lost within Scotland, it's a hole in the soul of the nation, so to speak. And that's something that touched me personally, living in these expat communities, where you could see where it was lost, the impact that that had. And when it's lost, how difficult it is to get it back. Without a doubt, returning to Scotland after those experiences, it just felt like we can do something about this and we can play our part. And the beautiful thing about football, and I almost don't have to say this, is football is a universal language in itself, where wherever you go in the world, if a football touches the ground, you'll make friends. You don't have to speak the language. You don't have to have the same culture. You don't have to have the same religion. But it's this connection and common understanding. If you bring the Gaelic language into that dynamic, it's a common cause that people can relate to, and you can express that through football. And the hope is that people around the world can identify to that and hear that story of, this is why this is important to the Gaelic speaking community. And football is just this fantastic vessel to share that with people all over the world. If I said to you just now, Rory, Brep and Bal, you'd have no idea what I meant. But if I kicked a football across the room, you'd pick up on the fact, oh, maybe it means kick the ball. It can be that spark. And for the Gaelic speaking community, that's vitally important. We have to be inclusive. We have to allow people to access our culture and experience that. And the origins of football are in community and in bringing people together. So for us, that's really what it's about. It's, can we just utilise this fantastic global way of expressing culture to try and make a difference for our own community?
You're spot on. And as we saw time and time again with numerous different communities, whether it's religious communities, national communities, people who don't have a recognised nation as well, sport, and particularly football, can be a way to lift people up and give them a voice. You know, it does so many different things for these communities that we saw that can be empowering, that can help spread the word or the goals or the missions of what you're looking to do. But I think what's important there is being inclusive and making sure that through football, having this universal language, people feel included in what you're doing as well. Let's talk about the Alba FA itself. So obviously you said you were a co-founder. So when was it you actually chose to found the Alba FA? How did it end up coming about?
So it's been a process over a number of years. I was playing in New Zealand when COVID struck and the world went into lockdown. So that was me returning to Scotland post-COVID-19 after being away for a number of years. At that stage, Donnie Forbes, who is a close friend, we went to Gaelic school together, grew up together. Donnie entered the world of professional football as a coach in community football. And we reconnected at that stage. And Donnie was working with the Scottish FA at the time. Myself had come back to the Highlands as well. And we formed FC Sonas at the time. So FC Sonas was a Gaelic-speaking football organisation with the purpose of encouraging people to participate in Gaelic language-related sporting activity. So a very different organisation to what the Alba FA evolved into. But I would say, Rory, over time, as myself and Donnie built out FC Sonas, we started to realise that the potential was much greater than we had originally anticipated. We held holiday camps in Inverness, in the Isle of Skye, in Lewis, and we had the opportunity 2 years ago now to go across to Nova Scotia, and collaboration with the Halifax Wanderers, who we've already mentioned. We held holiday camps there, where the dynamic was slightly different. It was more based for learners and using football as a medium to encourage language interaction. rather than language immersion, which is more relevant to the situation in Scotland. So essentially, over these years, FC Sonis was evolving and we were discovering a potential that previously we hadn't anticipated. And through running these holiday camps and Gaelic football sessions, coaches were becoming involved, the community was growing, and we started to meet all kinds of people in the Gaelic world who were also in the football world. And this community just started to form. And that's where the idea came to us that this could have clubs across Scotland, community clubs across Scotland that can all be connected under one banner. That's where the Alba FA concept started to form. And I guess to finalise that, over this process, when it was building up naturally within the community, an opportunity was presented to us to travel to Germany during the Euros to participate in cultural exchange games. With Scotland obviously being back at a major tournament, it provided the perfect backdrop and context, I guess, as well, of why this initiative is important. We went to a group of boys who had naturally developed over this period of time, and we said, basically, this is the opportunity. Can we make this happen? And an important point I should mention is we didn't have funding for this opportunity. So it was a case of, are we going to, or as a community, are we willing to self-fund this experience? The boys all bought into it. And that's where we thought, right, this is the perfect time to launch this restructured initiative. And that's how the Alba FA formed. And we travelled to Germany during the Euros, where we played 1860 Munich at their training ground in Munich, nearly a year away now. That was on the 12th of June last year. I should say that was their third team. It was a merger of former professionals who had played at a high level in Bundesliga 1 and 2, and then younger players who were coming through the ranks and some legends as well. So it was a mix of different abilities. The second game was against the Bavarian Football Association, who represent Bavaria as a region within Germany. So that was how the Alba FA came about. With this opportunity developing, we went to MG Alba, who are the media organisation who produce BBC Alba in partnership with the BBC, and we received support from MG Alba and their Speak Gaelic platform to tell this story online and to try and engage people with what this could become over a period of time. And since that time, Rory, it's almost been a year now, and it's just been growing and growing and growing.
That's incredible. I love it. I love everything you've touched on there is just amazing. From this idea of playing cultural exchange games in Germany to just like the meaning behind it and stuff like that. But I actually didn't realise it had only really been a year since you guys sort of formally restructured, I suppose, because when I was doing my research for this, it seems like you guys have been around for much longer, but I think that maybe kind of plays a little bit into the heritage and the culture of the Gaelic community, and that a lot of it it's oral. Do you know what I mean? It's natural, it's organic. Not a lot of it has to be necessarily structured or written down, but a lot of it just is. And I mean, off the top of my head, the only professional football club I think that had any sort of academies within the Highlands and Islands was Ross County, I think. And I don't even know if that's still a thing. I think that was maybe a year or two ago now. So out with that, what opportunities for playing professionally do footballers within the Highlands and Islands actually have? Because it's already an incredibly remote region. So if there's only one academy and that academy is taken away, then the opportunity becomes more and more difficult for people to actually achieve what they want to do, you know?
Absolutely. Again, you've touched on something really important there. And before I dive into that, is FC Sonis set the foundation for the Alba FA. And FC Sonis was the founding member club. And FC Sonis has now evolved into one of our community clubs. But FC Sonis is essentially one of 3 founding community clubs, which we hope to build up to 6 over a period of time. So within FC Sonis, it's responsible for developing Gaelic language football activity within the Highlands. We have a club in Uist, which is looking to develop Gaelic football activity within the Western Isles, and a club in Glasgow that's looking to do the same, which in the Gaelic world is Ballamore and Gael, which means the big city of the Gaels. Again, you touched on the Highland clearances and the amount of Highlanders that went down to Glasgow seeking industrial work. So there's a real connection there and a really large community within Glasgow due to that process. However, to go back to what you mentioned there, because I think it's very important, is within the Highlands and Islands, there is Ross County, as you've mentioned, and Inverness Caledonian Thistle as well, these two professional clubs. However, between the two of them, they're both quite heavily operating within Inverness or the greater Inverness area, and the challenges for participation are restricted across the board, whether you're in Skye or Lewis or Uist or in Fort William even. This ability to access regular football activity is restricted. I was across in Iceland 3 weeks ago visiting a club there, Breiðablik, and Icelandic football, in total contrast, has a smaller, Iceland as a nation has a smaller population than the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And Iceland suffered a lot of issues similar to the Highlands and Islands here, with alcoholism, substance abuse, mental health issues, and decided to tackle these social issues through increasing accessibility to sporting activity. And over a period of time, they developed out these multi-sports community clubs in partnerships with local authorities and government to basically keep people engaged in community activity. And the focus wasn't on producing elite professional football players. That was an outcome of having more people playing football more regularly and staying a part of a community. And it was an incredibly inspiring experience for what can be achieved in a geographically restricted region with various issues, various challenges, but through innovation and looking at their heritage and looking at their culture and who they are. Can we be different? Can we buy into that instead of fighting against it? And I think that's something that within the Highlands and Islands we need to do as well, which is buy into who we are, buy into our geographical locations and the challenges that come with that. Instead of viewing it as a restriction, it's viewing it and flipping the lens to this is our strength. Incredibly inspiring experience. And to put a Gaelic lens on that, where these issues within our own communities, these are fragile communities, and it's trying to keep Gaelic alive for future generations and engaging especially young people with the language in a modern day context. And that's where football comes into the equation. Football can change the narrative. It can make it cool. It can make it trendy. And for any minority language, a positive cultural identity is so important. If there's no positive cultural identity, there's a lack of confidence, a lack of self-esteem, and these issues that come with using a minority language. So to get to the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to achieve is creating these community hubs in different Gaelic communities that allow for people to engage with the language in a fun, natural dynamic that's away from Gaelic medium education. And Gaelic medium education has been a fantastic thing for the Gaelic-speaking community. And myself, the only reason I have the language is because of Gaelic medium education. However, it's at that stage now where it needs to progress beyond education into a social setting and allow people to continue to use it in their day-to-day lives. So just on what you touched on there, I think the Icelandic dynamic and the Icelandic model is extremely appropriate to us in the Highlands and Islands because similar size population with similar social issues in different ways, and the ability to look elsewhere for inspiration and apply that in our own way that's appropriate to our own communities is exactly what we're trying to achieve. And it's a big mission. It's very ambitious, but if you don't try and you don't play your bit, then there's always that regret, I guess, of what could perhaps have been. So it's just trying to use football as a tool to bring people together. And I think that's one of football's greatest attributes, is it can bring a community together.
100%. I think you've touched on something really important there as well, is that when Gaelic is mentioned in a casual sort of everyday setting, particularly here in the Lowlands, everyone always kind of assumes it's the language that you're talking about, but people forget that Gaelic just isn't a language, it's a culture and it is a community, and there are reasons why people discuss concepts such as the Gaelic nation. It's not just about the language, but like you said there, if you want to preserve the language, you also have to rebuild the culture around it. You know, there's always been the the kind of incredibly tedious debates about the Gaelic language signs and their place within Scotland, particularly within the Lowlands. And it's like, well, if Gaelic-speaking people are in the Lowlands and, they've got Gaelic signs, brilliant. And then, you've got other people who are like, oh, it's a waste of money and resources, which isn't true, and I don't agree with that. But I think, if you're going to be doing things like that in the Lowlands in Scotland to try and get people to engage with Gaelic a little bit more, then you also need to build the culture back around and help educate people about the culture instead of just dropping signage in that has Gaelic words on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's you can't just do one thing without doing the other, because it almost comes across as a little bit hollow. And I just think this idea of there being a Gaelic culture is so central to what the Alba FA does. This ultimately is why the Gaelic community need a representative football association, and why the Alba FA have stepped in to represent the Gaelic community.
Absolutely. At the heart of our mission, so to speak, is this is a membership organisation, and it's developing Gaelic community football clubs and quote-unquote Gaelic national teams. And something I'd like to stress with the Gaelic community football clubs is you correctly touch on Gaelic medium education and Gaelic signage in certain areas, and that lack of context and education to back that up as well, where essentially that's what we hope that these community football clubs can become. They can become a vocal point within the communities where if people want to hear Gaelic and interact with Gaelic, they can be around that. And that's not just for fluent speakers to bring fluent speakers together, but yourself, Rory, if you wanted to attend Gaelic five-a-sides and pick up some football terminology for pass the ball, man on, it's a fun and light and engaging way to experience the language without feeling that pressure or without feeling that difficulty of having to sit down and learn a language through an educational platform. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve as well. Is it's not just to provide these opportunities for Gaelic speaking communities, which these environments are so important to have a safe space to use the language and be immersed in the Gaelic language, but also for learners, for people who are curious to come and experience it and pick up some words and hear it being spoken and meet like-minded people who are also interested in maybe learning. And that's what these clubs could provide, is that vocal point within a community that allows fluent speakers, language learners, people with a curiosity to engage with the language in a fun way. And as I said, the concept of Gaelic five-a-sides is something that we're looking to roll out across our clubs. And you don't have to be fluent in a language to pick up football terminology. And it's just that fun way to engage with it. And it's basically learning through play, learning through doing. These are well-researched concepts. It's gamifying Gaelic language learning. So, can we make that a game? Can we make that fun? Obviously, Gaelic has a very strong presence in the traditional sectors, in music, in media, and sports is obviously another major sector within society. So it's just, can we provide another string to the bow? Can we provide that other door and that way into the language that's inclusive and allows anyone with an interest to engage with it?
That's brilliant. I like the idea of the Gaelic five-a-sides, and it leads it kind of nicely onto the next kind of few questions that I wanted to ask you, I suppose, really about the FA and how it operates, I suppose. So the first question that I had, would you say that the Alba FA is a national team, or has the ambitions of being a national team, or is it a representative team?
It's a really good question on lots of different levels. I think that concept of a national team and a representative team is so important because it's a bit of both. Yes, it's a representative team to represent Gaelic speakers and Gaelic communities, but also that national context is important as well, where you have national teams for Scotland's schoolboys, for Scottish universities, and these are a part of the Scottish football structures and associations. And with ourselves, it's having that national team for the Gaelic speakers within Scotland that can be represented. And this is where the concept of representation comes in, where it is representing that community, that culture and that identity within Scotland. But as we've mentioned, there's also Gaelic communities outside of Scotland, and that's where that representation process comes through as well, where in our mission and vision statement, it's to connect, inspire and grow Scottish Gaelic both nationally and internationally. And that's where that comes in, is not just restricting that within Scotland, but allowing the Gaelic-speaking communities and the fragments of Gaelic-speaking communities all around the world to engage with that through football. And, that connection to Nova Scotia that we've discussed is a vitally important one for us. And we're going back across there this summer. And I think, to answer your question, it is a bit of both. And for those reasons, it's vitally important that that concept of a national team for Gaelic speakers can be a source of pride. It can be a source of confidence and a source of identity. And I'll touch on a story from when we launched the initiative over in Germany that I think is very important. Before our second game against the Bavarian Football Association, one of our coaches, Innes Scullion, stepped forward and gave a speech to the team. He's identified a lack of confidence, heads were down in the warm-up, people needed a wee bit of inspiration to pick them up. And he stepped in and provided this speech where, at the heart of it, he said, this isn't just about playing football, this is about our language, our culture, our identity. And that is at the heart of why that concept of a national team and a representative team is important, because it's that recognition of the role that Scotland has played, that Gaelic has played within Scotland, but also the Gaelic communities out with of that as well. So I hope that provides some context there.
I mean, as long as it wasn't anything like Mick Kennedy's speech before Darvel played Falkirk. I mean, it's like the first one that ended up in TV was good, but the second one was like it's absolutely horrible to watch.
Absolutely, these things have to be authentic, don't they? I think so
Yeah.
many football coaches, you can't just prepare a speech in your mind and deliver it. It has to come off the cuff. It has to come from in the moment. And luckily, Innes's speech was very much in the moment, because otherwise it has the very opposite effect, as you've correctly mentioned there.
Yeah, everyone's just a little bit confused. But you're right, though. It's like when it has that authenticity and that ideal behind it, then it can land. And that's ultimately what people were saying. And the thing is, what a lot of our listeners might find surprising is that for yourself, Calum, and for the other members of the people who were playing that game, and for other Gaelic speakers, that type of speech would land and it would hit home and it would be inspiring. But for someone like myself, even though we're from the same country, I wouldn't have understood it, because I don't consider myself from the Gaelic nation. And this is what's so important about the discussion that we're having, is that this is something that is completely relevant and relatable to you guys. And it's up to other people from Scotland to do a bit of research, but also to engage with the types of things that you guys are doing to understand why it means so much to you guys. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what's really special about associations like yourselves, like Appalachia. You have these regions all across the world with really distinct, unique and powerful cultures that are perhaps different to the rest of the nation that they're actually in. And this is where you get, things like Conifa, who spring up to represent nations which don't necessarily have passports, or nations which are maybe culturally a nation. And I think this is kind of where the Alba FA fits into this whole sort of dynamic. I guess, to come back to this idea of a nation, what we mean by nation isn't that, the Alba FA would seek to rival the SFA to, kind of take over football in Scotland, or even divide it between the Highlands and the Lowlands. Because the Alba FA doesn't only operate in Scotland, as you've mentioned, it also operates in Nova Scotia, and you also have ambitions for it to operate elsewhere in the world, wherever the Gaelic diaspora actually exists and lives.
Absolutely. There's a point I'd like to touch on here, which is there's a Gaelic word, Gàidhealtachd, and Gàidhealtachd has come to be known as highlands, as an English translation. However, Gàidhealtachd means Gaeldom, so a place where Gaelic is spoken. And Gàidhealtachd is not as simple as highlands or lowlands. Gàidhealtachd is a evolving, adapting, living organism where wherever Gaelic is spoken, that is part of the Gàidhealtachd. So Nova Scotia, Gàidhealtachd. Gaelic-speaking communities in Scotland, including Glasgow, Gàidhealtachd. So the opposing Gaelic word for that is Gàidhealtachd, and Gàidhealtachd has become to be known as lowlands. However, Gàidhealtachd just means an area where Gaelic isn't spoken. And that's the difference, is that's an ever evolving concept. It's not restricted. So yeah, there is the traditional heartlands, but it's important to recognise that this concept of Gaeltacht is, that's really what the Alba FA represents, is the Gaeltacht regions and how that evolves and how that can be represented. And as you mentioned, work with the Scottish FA to keep these communities thriving and to tackle different social issues and build community spaces, increase participation to football activity through the medium of Gaelic. And that's a very inclusive and diverse approach. Obviously, working with the Scottish FA to do that is a unique process in itself, and that's really what this is about, is that representation and that ability to continue to evolve the Gaeltacht speaking areas over time. And that's absolutely working side by side with the Scottish FA, where one of our ambitions is, can we become an affiliated association of the Scottish FA? At the moment, they have 7 affiliated associations. Just to mention a few: Scottish women's football, Scottish para football, Scottish amateur football, Scottish schools football, and the list goes on. And essentially, for us, it's, well, can there be an association to represent Gaelic football or Gaelic-related football activity within Scotland? And as I mentioned, that's not just for fluent speakers, but for learners and those with a curiosity to engage with the language and find out more in a fun, inclusive way. So that ability to work side by side with the SFA is absolutely what we hope to achieve and build out over time. That obviously doesn't happen overnight. That's a process. But a foundation, I should mention, is already set, where BBC Alba have done fantastic work for a number of years now in promoting Scottish football through their coverage, showcasing the lower leagues, showcasing the rise of the women's game within Scotland as well. So there's already that natural relationship between the Gaelic speaking community through BBC Alba and that promotion of the Gaelic language through sports. And if we can work with the Scottish FA and BBC Alba on that media and that coverage aspect to provide participation opportunities where people who view that on BBC Alba can then directly engage. And that goes to your great example, Rory, on Gaelic signage, where people can see that, but then can they engage with the language? And that's that aspect that we're trying to just provide. Another tool is through football. It's a way that people can engage with the language in a fun community setting. And that's really at the heart of the mission over the next few years.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Again, football kind of plays into this, the kind of traditional elements of Gaelic culture, where a lot of it is oral, a lot of it is storytelling. There's a beauty in that as well. And I think, from a heritage standpoint, the Alba FA ticks a lot of boxes because of what you guys are looking to do. Yeah, it's great to see. And I had often wondered if an organisation like yourselves had previously existed or did exist, because, I think it would probably be fair to say that Eriskay has gotten quite a lot of spotlight over the years, mainly because of the FIFA decision to name it one of the most stunning places in the world to play football, which isn't entirely fair. It was a justified decision. But what got me curious is, well, it's obviously looking at Eriskay Football Club, but what support are the wider leagues getting out with just Eriskay? Yes, this is great recognition, but the benefits of it feel fairly short term. The benefits of it don't feel like they're spreading to the rest of the community where this football club operates. And I think that's what then got me thinking, well, do the Highlands and Islands have their own representative or organisational football association? And then obviously finding you guys, seeing what you guys are doing, spreading all over the world, it's just absolutely incredible. But it's, as you've mentioned before, it's a massive undertaking. But at the end of the day, part of the reason for doing it is to express Gaelic culture, using football as a vehicle for promoting that culture, but also embracing it and bringing other people into it as well, and being a part of this growing movement to build the culture around Gaelic speakers and the Gaelic community and bringing it to other parts of Scotland as well.
Something I'd like to mention there on Eriskay, as you've identified in that FIFA recognition that has come to Eriskay, is Traditionally, Shinty is the Gaelic speaking game, and that's such a strong and important connection between Gaelic culture and Gaelic identity. However, in places like Eriskay, in Lewis and Harris, and Isle of Uist, obviously, as well, North and South Uist, football has become the major community game. Football is the largest sport in Scotland, and that tie between Shinty is very important, and that's something that we hope to work side by side with. But on your point there is these communities have these strong clubs that are connected to their communities, that participate in their league setups and have done a fantastic process over a number of years to express their community through football. These connections are there with people who are involved in football and involved in Gaelic and passionate about Gaelic. And what's missing is just that structure to connect them all together and bring them all under one banner, so to speak. That's what we are trying to achieve. Can you go and work with these clubs to promote Gaelic through their activity and just flip the environment where it becomes Gaelic-led instead of football-led? Obviously, football leads, but it's that, whether it's learning, whether it's fluent speakers, it's just that focus on the language. And that's at the heart of what we're trying to do, and providing that structure where these remote communities are working together and supporting each other to provide a voice for Gaelic in football. And that's a phrase that we always go back to. If we can all come together as a community, these different clubs coming together as one under the Alba FA, it's that voice for Gaelic across the board. It's that representation. And to mention the Scottish FA, for example, if you're in a affiliated national association, you receive a board member on the Scottish Amateur Football Board, and that provides that direct representation for the language in all scenarios. So it's just rebuilding these structures and bringing different people within that community together. And that's essentially, as you mentioned, that FIFA recognition is great and these stories are fantastic. But if we can all come together to provide this resilient community that's working together over a period of time, the impact can be quite exciting over a number of years. And that's very much where we're at the moment. It's been an incredible year since we travelled to Germany, and how things have evolved in a year's time. There's this question of where is this going in the future? Where can it go? You mentioned Cnifa there. That's one of the options on the table. Another option is potential league entry in some format. There's these different scenarios that are now becoming realistic, and that's where obviously as a community a decision has to be taken of what is the best representation. Is that through Cnifa? Is that through cultural exchange games? Is that through league participation? And that's not a question that one person or two people can answer. That's a question for the Gaelic community, and it's a question for the people that we've brought together. Is where do they want this to go? Where do we want this to go? I think that's something that's really unique to the Gaelic community, is that collective voice where, you know, people act in the best interest of the community. And that connects to the oral aspect of Gaelic culture, where if you ask someone where they're from in Gaelic, it's Coasahow, which is from who are you from, instead of from where are you from. It's who are your people, who is your community. That aspect of bringing people together and a community making a decision is at the heart of what comes next. It's very exciting because we've built that community, and now it's a case of, well, what holds the greatest impact for the Gaelic language and culture? And it's an exciting process to see where that can take us.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as you said, a year on, the growth has just been incredible. And it's led us quite nicely to this point where we're having this conversation now. You've laid out all of these different plans. Cnifa, I think it would be fucking amazing if Scotland had a Cnifa representative, to be honest. Absolutely love Cnifa football. But in terms of the more immediate plans for the future, there's quite an exciting match coming up which could open the gateways to a further tournament, not just for the Gaelic community and the Gaelic nation, but for the entire Celtic community and Celtic nations.
Absolutely. Again, you obviously correctly identify Cnifa as an organisation that represents minority peoples, geographical areas that are non-FIFA related. And we have a game coming up against the Kernow FA. So the Alba FA will play the Kernow FA on June 21st in Inverness, the heart of the Highlands. And obviously for us, that's a great opportunity to allow our community to directly see that national team aspect, representative team aspect of the Alba FA, and bring the community clubs together in that setting to celebrate what we're building. Because last year in Germany, that was a fantastic experience, a fantastic launch. However, the Gaelic community couldn't directly experience that themselves, only through social media content. So it's this really exciting game where, as you've mentioned, the Curnow FA have participated in Canifa competitions in the past, competing in Canifa World Cups and friendlies at different levels. This match between two Celtic nations, so to speak, two teams that represent the Gaelic-speaking community, and with Curnow being the Cornish for Cornwall, and they represent Cornwall as a geographical region and the Cornish culture. And that's 2 out of the recognised 6 Celtic nations. And I guess through this game, it's exciting. It's a game of football. It's a cultural exchange game, but it does pose this question of, well, could this grow? Could this become a Celtic Nations Cup where you have a team from Elanvannan, the Isle of Man, Cymru, Wales, Eire, Ireland, Bregia, Brittany, competing in sporting events together? And the Celtic Media Festival, Pan-Celtic Music Festival, these aspects already exist and are very strong. And it just poses this quite exciting question of, well, can the sporting community add another layer to that representation to really celebrate culture and heritage through football? And obviously with the Euros coming to the UK and Ireland in 2028, I think that provides a beautiful backdrop to that as well. So, as I said, it's a game of football that carries cultural significance, and hopefully it kind of epitomises what we're trying to achieve with the Alba FA. But it does also just float this quite exciting question of what could this become over a number of years. And yeah, we're just really excited to obviously play this game within the Highlands, the heartland of Gaelic culture as well. Just the perfect place to do it. So we're very much looking forward to it. And if anyone's interested in the initiative, there'd be, as we say in Gaelic, be fáilte blá, which is there'll be a warm welcome to absolutely anyone who wants to come along and experience this initiative close up and personal.
100%. I think from the stuff on the ground, like, you know, getting into the communities, putting on football for the communities, trying to help people who, you know, are struggling with social deprivation, isolation, which we know is far more pronounced within communities in the Highlands and Islands and within the Gaelic community as well. It's a fantastic way to do those things, but you're also doing it in a way that's expressing what is an incredibly unique and special cultural part of Scotland's heritage. When the Euros come to the UK and Ireland, to have like a Canifa Euros or a Canifa Celtic Nations tournament happen at the same time would be absolutely amazing. You know, you've touched on everything to do with the Alba FA and what the goals are. But just before we finish up, Calum, tell myself and our listeners what the Alba FA means to you, what the Gaelic community means to you, but also why the Gaelic community is different and needs the Alba FA to strengthen its ties with the rest of Scotland and the world.
Oh, I think that's a great to wrap things up on. I'll do my best to breast that, but something really came to me when you were talking there, Rory, and I think it's vitally important. Whereas through the Alba FA, it's a vitally important aspect for the Gaelic community. As I've mentioned, the Gaelic community is very strong in traditional music and in media, and sports is one of the world's greatest industries. And football being Scotland's biggest sport, UEFA did a report, the social return in investment on football to the Scottish economy, and it highlighted the value of football to the Scottish economy. The findings were breathtaking, to be honest. Obviously, if that social return of investment, if the small part of that is coming to Gaelic communities that are fragile and fighting to keep the language alive, it can be a social and economic factor that can make a difference, that can support these communities, that can empower jobs, that can empower careers, that can provide a positive cultural identity and express a pride in who we are and where we come from. So from that social perspective, we touched on Gaelic medium education and the fantastic strides that have been made there. And now it's that next step where how can we move Gaelic outside of the traditional sector, outside of schools, and really bring it into into the social environments. And that's something that I believe that we can really help with, and we can provide those opportunities through sports as this fantastic social vessel that carries so much importance. I believe that for Gaelic speakers, it's that expression, and that is something that football allows you to do, is be represented, to come together in community settings. And I guess through my own experience in the game, representing the Alba FA has helped me rediscover my own love for football. To be very transparent and very honest, I sort of became disillusioned with the professional game, and that disconnect from community, that disconnect from representation, and that focus on elite performance. And this process of evolving the Alba FA has helped me rediscover my own passion for the game, which is, that's what football should be about. It should be about communities. It should be about bringing people together, letting people express who they are, and representing real, breathing communities. It's not just about first team elite performance, it's about the grassroots and the opportunities and the difference that that can make for people. As I said, it's reconnected me to the origins of football, and I also believe firmly that it can reconnect people within Scotland and out with Scotland with Scottish origins and Gaelic origins. It can help to reconnect them to the importance of the Gaelic language, culture and identity as well. So for me, it's those two aspects. It's, yes, it can make a difference for Gaelic, but I also think that it represents a direction that football can go down as well, which is going back to the origins of the game and community and reconnecting with people. So for me, that's what it means. That representation for the Alba FA on a personal note is the proudest moments of my own career and experiences in football as well. And that's something that I think is important to say.
No, it definitely is, and I'm really glad that you said that as well. I think it is really important. It's about finding what you want in your football. It comes back to who you are as a person, and if you want your football to reflect who you are, but also to represent your culture and people who you see as being part of your community, then that's part of what makes football special. And that can be whether you're part of a community like the Gaelic community, whether you're part of a small town somewhere, and that's part of what makes football a little bit more than just a 90-minute game, is why you're playing it and how you feel represented while you're playing it. Well, hopefully, in the Celtic Nations Cup game, I'm hoping to get up to Inverness. It would just be great to see this kind of historic fixture taking place, because I'm really keen to see if this Celtic Nations Cup match can turn into something a lot bigger, because it would be huge in terms of representation for all the communities involved. And it's just another thing that's kind of enriching our football experience at the moment, which groups like Canifa and other similar organisations are already doing. And again, that's not a bad thing. The quicker that it comes to Scotland in a kind of more frequent fashion, I think the better. It would be something that's really special for our communities here. But Calum, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Thank you very much to all of our listeners for tuning in for this one. Again, if there's anything that you want us to cover, any questions that you have about this episode, then please do get in touch. You can DM us on X, that's @_footballheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk as well. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave us a review or comment. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, it does wonders for us in terms of getting our podcast pushed in front of new listeners. But for now, Calum, say goodbye.
Taplat, Rory, thank you very much for the opportunity today and letting us talk about our message. And for anyone who's listening to this and curious to learn more, we'd love to hear from you. Ariash, Taplat, or Son Corum, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that. If there's anyone that would like to get in touch with the Alba FA to discuss what they're doing, or even take part in any of the sessions that they are planning to host, then we'll leave details to get in touch with them in our show notes that you can do so. But it's goodbye from me as well, and we'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.